Hi folks, welcome to the second episode of Ann Arbor Shield. Today we thought we would go on the street of Ann Arbor and ask a variety of questions ranging from hiring to view of the police, etc., etc. I think I need to put kind of a disclaimer out there, if you will, that we're going to discuss a lot of topics that are extremely controversial, especially in the nation today. And this 30-minute show isn't going to dissuade or persuade anyone with regard to, for instance, the use of force by police officers. It is simply, as Detective Jack Foster would say, courageous conversation, and that's all we're going to do here today. So I appreciate all my guests coming into the audience or into the studio today. First with me is Doug Martell. He works with me on the Community Engagement Office. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you, Tom. I've been a police officer here for over 20 years, and I have 25 years of total police experience. A number of the positions that I've held here are a dedicated neighborhood team on the west side of Ann Arbor, and field training officer, bicycle training officer. Most of my career here has been in some type of community engagement type position with community-oriented policing as in the forefront of that. So,
welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Next we have Rebecca Singer, who is here, and I appreciate all her courage in being here today. So Rebecca, tell us a little bit about you.
I've been with the Ann Arbor Police Department for 17 years. Right now I'm assigned to the patrol unit on day shift, and I've had various positions within the department. I've been in the in-service position within the Detective Bureau, bicycle trained, evidence technician, and a few other various positions.
Welcome aboard. Thank you. Last we have newly promoted Pat Maguire. Welcome aboard, Pat. What can you say?
Thanks, Tom. I've been with the Ann Arbor Police Department since 2000. All those years have been on road patrol. Spent some time as a community policing officer on the State Street beat, on foot and on bike. And then spent about 10 years as a canine handler, and like you said, recently taken a position as a patrol sergeant.
Okay. Welcome aboard, everybody, and I appreciate you being here. If there's one thing that most officers, including myself, fear more than deadly force, it's sitting in front of a camera. And yet here we are today. Okay. We're going to cut to our first episode on the street. So whenever you guys are ready, let it go.
If someone you loved wanted to be a police officer, what would your reaction be and why?
I would not want them to do it. I would not want them to get injured in the line of duty or make the wrong choices or have any kind of conflicts in their life.
If I were hiring a police officer, I would be very concerned about his or her level of sensitivity to people, to people's needs, to how people think, especially people of different backgrounds, different cultures.
I would look for non-biased opinion. If I was in charge and I was to have an application and I present it to an officer or a potential officer, I'd put on the application experience. I run a background check. I'd even check social media.
I would want someone that is willing to keep our community safe and to be someone that's not going to go against the laws and do whatever they want because they have that power. I would want someone that's friendly and enjoys working as a police officer and wants to protect people.
Okay, so clearly we're talking about hiring police officers, and we're just going to comment briefly on the practices within Ann Arbor. And I thought it would be interesting, since we are in the process of hiring right now, the requirements as it stands within the city of Ann Arbor on hiring. So for every one position, we receive approximately 200 applications. Once those applications are received, they are dwindled down to a manageable amount. From there is what is called ergometrics, which, if you're like me this morning when I was told about it, had no idea what that was. Essentially, it's testing that involves observation, assessment, critical thinking, interrogation, investigative, team orientation, confrontation initiative, restraint and use of authority, ethical orientation, ability to understand and help with human distress, and organizational orientation. After you complete the ergometrics, you are then assigned an interview with 4 personnel from the police department and 1 representative from human resources. You are then given a conditional offer of employment pending results of your medical, your psychological, which if I recall, help me out, was 3 or 4 different battery of tests that took.
And an interview with a psychiatrist.
Interview with a psychiatrist, and that took, well, it takes all day. And then a background that goes way back. This is not going to cover the last 90 days of your life. They're going to go all the way back. So that just gives you an idea of the hiring process required of that. We'll start with you, Doug. If you have any comments, questions, or thoughts on the hiring process. I myself am absolutely blown away that that to be hired as a police officer is probably one of the most demanding things to undergo and come out the other end and essentially work on the streets. So, and I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, I would agree, Tom. I think that especially here in Ann Arbor, we have very stringent requirements and a lot of disqualifiers, if you will, as people come in and decide that they want to become employed here. They quickly find out things that were in their background that may not have seemed that big of a deal for them at the time. Ends up being something that's that gets them out of the running for a police officer position here. So yeah, I would agree with you on that.
Thanks.
The only other thing I would add is that, you know, most police departments require a college degree. At least Ann Arbor requires at least an associate's degree. So I think you're getting an educated police department within the Ann Arbor Police Department. Not all departments are the same, but as far as ours goes.
And you bring up a good point about the education. I think, I didn't get the stats before I came in here, but I think the majority of our officers have 4-year degrees, and I know there's a percentage that also hold masters. So anyhow, Sarge?
I think it's very important what the last young lady on there said, is that you want police officers that are going to really enjoy being police officers, and I think that the City of Ann Arbor does so much to get such a unique group of individuals working here that we really have a lot of people that do enjoy their job here and do like policing in the city.
Agreed.
I think that's very important.
Okay. Let's go to our next segment, if you will, and I believe this is going to be a question or comments regarding the duties of the police.
What kind of things do you think most police officers do during their shift at work?
Well, I'm hoping that they do a lot of community outreach, and I also hope that they're patrolling the areas.
I would say that they probably spend all their time looking for people that are robbing stores or, you know, breaking laws in cars.
I'm sure some of them patrol, some of them may have desk jobs. I'm sure there's people that kind of just push paperwork, work behind the scenes. I mean, I'm sure there's different aspects as far as different police officers and what their titles and names and job descriptions may be.
We're talking about what does the average police officer do during the course of their day. One of the interviews did hit on a good point, and that is there are a lot of different duties within the police department. That is to say, there's supervision, there's community policing, there's administration, et cetera, et cetera. So, and our folks today have all held numerous positions and continue to do so. So, Doug, give us a little bit of idea. They talked in here. Someone talked about. We hope that you're reaching out what we call community policing or community engagement now. And I know that you're in that unit, so maybe you can explain a little bit what your experience with that is and so forth.
Sure. In the community engagement unit, we do essentially the outreach for the police department. We do schoolwork, K through 5 leadership, reading, goal-setting programs. Out of our office, we do Safety Town. We do, I know that you're familiar with the senior groups that we work with, so we do Coffee with a Cop with senior groups. work with the Veterans Administration Hospital and Veterans Court, Mental Health Court. We work very closely with Community Support and Treatment Services, CSTS, and the mental health arena to help
Follow up on that for me, because I know that you had a situation last year where there was a mental health consumer on the streets and they were usurping a lot of calls for service from patrol. And you worked with, I forget who it was, but initially or eventually you got help for this individual. They were removed from the streets and thereby allowing patrol to do what they need to do.
Yes, this particular individual was, like you said, tapping a lot of the resources through the police department, fire department, Huron Valley Ambulance, myself and Officer Paddock and a couple other officers, as well as some personnel from the police or the fire department, worked on his case, and actually I kind of spearheaded the mental health portion of it and got the mental health people involved. He was a very tough case for them as well, and they were able to place him in a hospital and get him the care that he needed.
Outstanding. And Officer Singer is currently assigned to patrol. That is the backbone of any police department. And so maybe, Rebecca, if you can, just give us an idea of what, because everybody has their own idea, right, of what a police officer does all day long. I mean, there were a number of comments about cops and donuts, but I cut them out. We cops here don't eat donuts, okay? It's bagels, papaya juice, something like that. But give us an idea of what the average officer does with their shift.
Well, obviously, the most important thing is responding to emergencies. In various other calls that citizens call in, that's probably our primary job. Additional jobs would be obviously traffic safety, you know, ensuring that the laws be followed. I also am assigned to the evidence tech program, so when we get a crime scene, I go out and I actually process the scene. That usually takes quite a bit of time up if you're processing a scene.
Now, as one of the gentlemen in the film alluded to, and as television would have us believe, the minute you put it in gear for the day, it's bank robberies and kidnappings and so forth and so on. What's the reality of a total day, generally speaking? What is the reality of the time that you spend responding to what we call hot calls?
I would say on a various day, you probably have 3-4 emergency calls. We have a lot of calls where we, vagrants and people that are incapacitated, those kind of things we respond on more frequently than actual emergencies.
So most of the day, would you agree or disagree that you are observing, right, and preventing, if you will, but primarily just observing the environments that you pass through, whether it's on foot or in a car, and based on your observations, you determine if everything is as it should be and people are safe, or if there's something amiss or if something is about to go amiss.
Yeah, certainly we actually will patrol areas that each of us are assigned to a different area. Mine happens to be the downtown area, so I will go through all the neighborhoods and extra patrol those and make sure that there's nothing suspicious going on. Check the parks, make sure that no one's fighting or anything like that.
Excellent. And last but not least, Sarge. Now you're in a little bit different position than the rest of us because we are all staff, so to speak, and you are managerial or a sergeant. So.
Sure. So I work, right along with Rebecca and doing the same thing in patrol, but my job is kind of a little bit more helping manage the back end things, get paperwork and reports routed and sorted to where they need to be. If officers may have questions or a little bit of guidance is needed, and help provide some insight as to different ways to handle things. Also, we're sort of a liaison between the citizens and the police department if they want to contact us and discuss the service they had one way or another, and just kind of manage and make sure the patrol service is going smoothly and effectively, and officers are able to do their jobs.
Okay, thanks, Pat. And now let's go to our next series of questions on the street for Ann Arbor Shield.
If you have a negative view of police officers,
no negative view. I think all police officers are good. It's just You know, it just depends on the situation.
I think it has a positive effect because police help keep our city safe.
I think that a lot of the things that have been happening are not necessarily representative of the officers in this area.
I would say yes and no. With everything that's going on, you see like the innocent killings.
I've been in a situation that police officer pulled me over, and 2 times. One time they pulled me over, and I remember the police officer, he told me his name, he introduced himself, sir, my name is this, and what I pulled you over, you did this, and then he said, okay, you can go,
A lot of times I do think that the police, not in general, but specifically a lot of hard butts want to, be the police and want to be tough and stuff like that.
But in another situation, I saw a police officer also. I was, backing up, and she yelled at me, That was, I will never forget that.
I have been a victim of police brutality, very minor, but the police officer took my head and slammed it on the hood, which I understand that can be the booking, but he must not have did it correctly because he had to pull it up again and do it the second time right, and stuff like that.
I'm sure they're very nice people outside of the uniform, but while they're in uniform, they're always constantly looking for something that's wrong versus finding what's right. And I understand that the job is to find people that are speeding or, look like they're going to cause an issue. But as a citizen who's paying their salary, it bothers me that I always feel like I'm not innocent till proven guilty.
Okay, back in the studio. I'm going to open by just commenting briefly. I thought there were some good comments and questions that we got from these folks, but I wanted to bring you on an officer's side of public interaction, if you will, but another facet. I worked at a small agency on the west side of the state, and in that particular community, there was a general support for the police there in spite of what we had to do each day. When I came here to Ann Arbor, I would say within a day or two, I was educated very quickly that not everyone is a fan of the police. And throughout my now 25 years of policing, I have found that it is often based on a negative experience they had, perhaps, in their eyes, or a perception they heard from somebody else, or perhaps even media. They picked up and made reality out of that. The long story short is, I've unfortunately run into a lot of people who judge a police officer based on their uniform without even knowing anything about that person. And what strikes me as ironic is, by and large, we do not advocate prejudice in this society. And I, for one, am all about that. But yet, it's okay to do that if you're wearing a certain uniform. I've never got that, never have. You should be able to get to know the officer one-on-one, then make your assessment based on that. But having said all that, that's just my 2 cents, and that's my opinion. Last I knew, I'm still entitled to that to some degree. There were a number of comments I thought were really interested. I think it was toward the last part there, and I'd like you guys to comment on it. That he comments that he often feels like he's being judged or watched, and it doesn't leave him feeling very good. And yet, as you pointed out, Rebecca, earlier, that is what we do. I mean, we do assess, we do look for things that are out of place. So if you have someone that makes a right turn on red and it's clearly posted no turn on red, you're going to get stopped. But I would like you to just comment on that, and maybe throw in there what you think with regard to the comments that were made also on a traffic stop. I think one of the gentlemen made reference to when he was stopped for an infraction. The officer introduced themselves, were very polite, professional, etc. And at the same token, I guess he was backing up inappropriately, and an officer screamed and yelled at him and left him rather jarred. So whatever your thoughts are, or 2 cents you guys want to throw in on this topic. Doug?
Well, as you well know, as police officers, we're tasked with things that most people would find at times repulsive. And we have to deal with people on all sorts of different levels, from people that are residentially challenged, homeless, to people that are in crisis in their own home. And we have to wear many hats and sift through all those dynamics and try to make sense of them at times. And that can be emotionally taxing. And it's great that that one gentleman had a good experience with a police officer. Is that going to be the case every time somebody has interaction with a police officer? Well, in a perfect world, that'd be great, but it doesn't always happen like that, because, as you pointed out, we're human beings and we have thoughts and emotions, and sometimes we carry things to work with us that are put pressure on us as well. So we should be able to put those things aside and do what we're supposed to do, and have a strong moral compass, which I hope we all do. But sometimes that may go a little astray, and not so much maybe the moral compass, but just our ability to deal effectively with people, because there's other pressures or frustrations that go along with the job. So,
for sure. Thanks, Tom.
I guess out of all the videos, the guy that said that.
Which one?
The guy that at the very end, the guy that said that he feels that everyone's looking.
Right. Okay.
Negatively at everyone.
Okay.
I guess my thing is, everyone knows police officer's job is dangerous. I mean, we are constantly looking for crime afoot. That's what we do. Right. We want to be preventive, and a lot of times we can't be, but on our downtime, we are looking for stuff to get into to keep the community safe. So by doing that, you may feel that way, but it's not necessarily us looking at you in a judgmental type of fashion. It's us actually trying to figure out everything that's going on and make sure everything's in its place and that there's nothing dangerous going on to keep us all safe.
Agreed. As an aside note, real quick, kind of comical, we were just on vacation, and I saw in a distance a man and a woman in the water, and she was quite animated in what she was saying to her, I assume her husband, and the hands were flying, and I was thinking, there's going to be a fight here any minute. And after about 4 or 5 minutes of this going on, my wife, who has no police training whatsoever, and obviously has more common sense than I did, turns to me and says, "Sweetheart, she's deaf and she's signing her husband as to." So, but that is an example that Becky points out, that Rebecca points out, that that a police officer's job, and I would hope the community would see the value in that, is prevention. And I wish, we all wish, you had a little sign above you that says good guy, good girl, bad girl, but it doesn't, that's not reality. The reality is you have to go by the totality of the circumstances, what this person is doing or not doing, and that's the nature of police work. But anyhow, Sarge, what are you throwing there?
I think these comments are a reminder, to all of us that I think there's a heavy part media plays in people's opinions on law enforcement, especially right now. And then people's very limited interactions with the police officers kind of play on that. So if you have a somewhat negative experience where you need to call the police to your home and you feel that either an officer is short with you or doesn't give you the attention you want, I think that you add that on to any negative perception you may have seen in the media right now with police not being super popular, and you come away with a taste in your mouth that is unpleasant, and you're not necessarily happy with police, you're not necessarily impressed by the police. But I think sometimes people forget too that there's different reasons for an officer maybe being short or standoffish. Like you were alluding to, there's always officer safety is a big concern, and officers are trained constantly to be vigilant and be on the lookout for potential threats. Unfortunately, that kind of results in officers being somewhat impersonal or standoffish at sometimes. It can leave citizens with a negative impression. So I think it's a good reminder for both citizens to understand where officers are coming from, and for officers to remember, that we have to have a positive impact on the people we deal with every day.
Yeah. Good point. Okay, let's move on to our next series, if you will.
Under what circumstances should an officer be able to use force against someone, and why?
And like when you see another weapon or something, like when their life is in danger, I feel is when they should bring their weapon out or use like a deadly force, I guess.
Okay, back in the studio. And as the sergeant pointed out, there is a lot of discussion, much of it passionate with regard to use of force by police officers in the nation. We won't go into the history of why that is. It is what it is. The young lady talked about what she believes a police officer should use, and that is when he or she observes a weapon and then take appropriate action with that. There are a couple comments I want to make with regard to that. One is there are police officers who have shot and killed folks that later were found to have toys. And I will let you guys speak to that with regard to toy. And the other thing is there are certainly police officers that have shot and killed unarmed. That doesn't mean they didn't pose a threat. And by that I simply mean this. If I were to take a simple pen or a pencil and I were to use it as a weapon and say that you could not use deadly force, I doubt there would be very many in the audience that would say, you know, that would take that on. And yet, you know, the husbands, the wives, the sons and the daughters are out there doing that every day. And I'm not putting this on a pedestal. We signed up for it, and that's willing to do. But I don't think there's anybody that I'm aware of is willing to lay down their life and bet that this person is not going to intentionally kill or harm me when they have a weapon. And a weapon can be almost anything. So with regard to all that, if you guys can just cover the toy thing, including, I know a lot of them now are, you know, weapons are being painted to resemble toys, period, end of story. But just your thoughts on what we've talked about so far, you know, the use of force, deadly force. Doug?
Going back to the video, she looked like she was kind of grappling with what the reason the officer may need to use some type of force, whether it's deadly force or less than lethal force. And one of the things that comes to mind foremost really in my mind is that the standard of reasonableness, and that's what we are typically judged on as police officers, what we did based on the available information, which can be in a matter of a second and a half. The decision that we make, was it reasonable? And then there's people after the fact that are able to sit down and very calmly sit down and look at what the totality of the circumstances are and decide whether that officer acted reasonably or not. So when you talk about toy guns, well, now they're painting real guns pink and blue and fluorescent colors to make them attractive, or maybe intentionally disguise them to make them look like toys when they're actually real and they can be used for the wrong purpose. Right. Or the airsoft guns that are very, very realistic that I would challenge anybody to decide in a split second whether that gun is real or not. And that's the kind of decisions that police officers are often tasked with making.
Yeah, for sure.
And
in a split second.
In a split second.
Yeah.
In a matter of a second and a half, 2 seconds or less.
Yeah.
So that's a difficult thing to overcome.
For sure.
Well, officer safety is obviously a key to this all, and our level of force that we use. So the toy gun that looks real or the real gun that looks fake, either way you look at it, we have to take that in a split second, just like he said, and make a decision whether to use lethal or non-lethal force. So I think that this day and age, the media has had such a negative outlook on police. You always hear the negative stuff. You don't ever hear the positive stuff, that people think we automatically are going to go with a decision, a bad decision. And that's not necessarily the case. Like, I've been a police officer for 17 years. I haven't had a lethal force situation, but that doesn't mean that I wouldn't be prepared to do it if I come in contact with it. So I guess I'm going home at the end of the day regardless, and I'm going to keep myself safe. And if that means that I have to use lethal force against somebody, I'm going to.
Sarge, can you talk real briefly to this aspect? I don't want to put you on the spot, but the argument that says an officer should be able to, if you will, take the first shot from the bad guy or gal your way. They should be able to single-handedly defend themselves against a knife or some other weapon without resorting to deadly force. In other words, you know, the burden is on you to not protect yourself in any way.
Responsive.
Right, but
Sure.
but to take the first, second, third hit, and then maybe you can react.
Sure, and I don't know. I think maybe that that argument might be grounded in a lot of movies or TV shows and things people see that are pretty unrealistic about people being able, you know, to fight and get in gunfights and do things like that. But I think it's absolutely unreasonable to expect that an officer put up with any kind of assault, whether, you know, being punched or hit or shoved first, and allowing a suspect to do that before they react. Just as it's unreasonable to expect an officer to be shot at before they're allowed to react. And I think the job of an officer is to use lethal force if they must in order to prevent a greater harm. So when I say that, I mean if an officer were to wait for a suspect to perhaps start firing before they fire back, then perhaps more innocent people are injured or harmed, or maybe the officer is rendered unable to then unarm the suspect, and the suspect can go on to cause harm or take lives from more people. So I think we expect and we require officers to be able to analyze and perceive threats for what they are, given the circumstances they have at that moment, like Doug said, but then to try and prevent any harm from there.
Thanks. Okay, let's go to our next series of questions.
Although I haven't had any negative run-ins, the media has been portraying police officers very negatively recently. And it would be interesting to hear from like the police officer's perspective, because I feel like it's been a really one-sided story recently, and you know, both of the sides need to be heard.
Just with the issues that's been going on lately with stuff of like shooting like African American males and stuff like that, so it kind of worries me of, you know, walking down the street, or you know, if it looks suspicious, if I'm doing something, or you know, if I'm doing something wrong.
You know, I really don't know how to answer that other than it's just a lot of negative press surrounding them, but I'm sure that that's not what their motive is, you know, to just shoot first and ask questions later. I think it's our society, all the violence, and that's the only question, or how I can answer it.
Okay, so essentially we're talking about the media in law enforcement today. No sense belaboring what's been going on in our nation over the last year, 2 years especially. I did want to start the discussion with something that I can only speak for myself. My colleagues can agree or disagree with regard to the media and their role in, especially in their perception of law enforcement. I'm quoting now from Jim Glennon, Washington Post, this year. He quotes, "My problem is that almost no one in the mainstream media defends police officers. They prefer to fan the flames." He also goes on to say that police, you know, that law enforcement in general certainly can make strides to improve in certain areas, and I think we'd all be in agreement with that. He does bring two great examples that I think, what we refer to as media hype. And he quotes from articles that were published in the Washington Post. In one it says, in quotations, "In an alley in Denver, police gunned down a 17-year-old girl joyriding in a stolen car," end of quotes. The other quote is, in quotations, "49 people had no weapons, while the guns wielded by 13 others turned out to be toys. In all, 16% were either carrying a toy or were unarmed." He goes on to make the comment that, you know, how we use words and what we do with words, what we do with visual images, if it is on television, etc., have a great deal of power, and they can be skewed and they can be perceived with regard to whoever is putting that out there. That's my 2 cents. I'm not saying that there aren't things that need to be corrected in law enforcement. But I, for one, am absolutely dumbfounded at this kind of writing without regard to, a totality of the circumstances, what exactly took place here. I mean, police gunned down a 17-year-old. And if you read the article further on, there's a lot more to the story than that. And so that's my 2 cents. But I think that has definitely contributed to where we find ourselves now at a nation with citizenry on one side and police officers on the other. That's my 2 cents. Doug?
Interesting article from, and some good points on that. People sometimes can't read past the headlines, and they get stuck on that, whatever that may be, however skewed, as you put it, it can be. And even sometimes if they read past that, it's difficult for them, because when they walk away from that article, they put down, they click off their computer, that image of that headline is still stuck in their head, and it's hard to get away from that. Irresponsibility, I think, is a big thing that rings in my ears as far as how sometimes the media portrays the police. And all you really have to do is read some of the blogs on MLive that people write in, because I really get a sense that these folks really need to sit down and talk to a police officer and maybe gain some understanding as to yes, we are human beings with feelings and emotions, just like everybody else. But we have a difficult job, and just like you said, we signed up for it, so we get what comes our way. But just to take a few moments to have an understanding as to sometimes what we're up against and media-wise, and not to use that broad brush to paint us all as though we're the evil entity, because we are here to help, and we're here to make things peaceful. We are peacekeepers, and sure, there's some bad cops out there, just like there's teachers that aren't so good, there's doctors that aren't so good. They write false scripts or give people cancer treatments when they don't have cancer. Right. So it's across all occupations. But boy, we really get the fanfare when somebody screws up, and that's something that I'm sure we could do better. If we don't do better, we don't grow, and if we don't grow, we don't improve, and that's what to say that we're perfect would be a fallacy.
Yep. Excellent. Rebecca?
I guess my biggest fear is that, one of these highly televised police situations happens here. I think by far our police department is pretty educated, and we do a pretty good job of what we do out here. Every time I see one of these stories on the news, I'm like, oh, God, right. Good grief. And I just hope that, that kind of situation, that people do get both sides, all the facts. And I think it is, true journalism should show the actual facts of a situation before they report it. And I hope they do that. But obviously we know that negativity sells better than, good stories. So unfortunately, it's the day we live in, and we unfortunately have to deal with the outcome of these highly televised situations.
Thanks.
I agree. I think, unfortunately, the headlines are what people remember, and it's a lot easier to throw a headline out when you've got a short 3-second cell phone video of a bad Apple officer doing something they shouldn't do. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that we have officers not only in Ann Arbor but around the country doing good things every day that aren't necessarily as glorious, but we're out there helping people. An example I could think of is recently we had a woman in Ann Arbor call in the middle of the night. Unfortunately, she was home alone and her dog passed away in the basement, and she needed help. She couldn't carry it up the stairs, so she was asking for someone to come help and carry it so she could get it to a car and get it to the vet. And that's not necessarily a police function. It's not what police officers sign up to do, but it's something that helps somebody in our community. So absolutely, we sent a car out to help her out with that. And I think it's these little tiny things like that that we're out there doing every day that help make Ann Arbor a better place and a little better corner of the world. So it would be nice if the media would pick up on that. But I think, in response to the very first person that posed a question, they want to know about officers, that like Doug said, we're people too. We have senses of humor, we have lives, we have families, and I think we all signed up for this job because we want to have fun and we enjoy doing it. But unfortunately, every once in a while we're painted by a brush of someone, the occasional officer that's not the best doing something wrong.
Yeah. Agreed. Well, with that, we are out of time. In fact, we are beyond time. So we wrap up segment 2 of the Ann Arbor Shield today. As I promised you at the onset, it would be controversial. Please do not flood my email or my phone with derogatory remarks, etc., etc. This was, as I pointed out, or Detective Foster pointed out, this was casual conversation, and we'll leave it at that. But as we sign off, I just wanted to say that I have never served with a better group of men and women than within the Ann Arbor Police Department. I'm very proud to be a police officer, as they are, and I know that most of them will not be deterred by how we are presented. So with that, have a good day.